Well, thank you very much. It's certainly an honor to be here and to have 2 hours to talk to you about what I've been doing with my life for the last 45 years. We'll be looking at classroom management, which is simply the skills that a teacher uses every day on the job. And as was mentioned, we studied the teachers that were already highly successful and tried to figure out what made them so successful. So I'm going to demonstrate some things. I'll be down here on this level instead of up above. And so let me just begin with a story of how I got started in this. I'm a clinical psychologist by training. So I had an indirect interest in the classroom. And at UCLA, when I was in graduate school, which is a very long time ago, we're in the middle of the behavior modification revolution, and I'm sure you've heard about consequences and behavior modification and all that in your courses, and we thought we were quite hot. But I wasn't that impressed with it, and I think the reason is that I come from a family of teachers. So my mother, my sister, my aunts, great aunts, back 150 years, teachers. And so you learn some things growing up in a family of teachers that nobody actually has to tell you. And the first is that teachers work about twice as hard as anybody appreciates. And the second is that the last thing in the world you'll ever have is extra time. In fact, your time is usually spoken for twice over, particularly after school. So if I come up with some fancy schmancy management program for you in dealing with a kid who's aggressive, or a kid who doesn't do any work, or a kid who won't follow instructions, if I come up with a fancy behavioral program that costs you 15 to 20 minutes a day to operate, I've done you more harm than good because you don't have that time. So the only thing you can really afford is things that don't take time. Things that are cheap, things that are easy. And that's not what we were doing when I was in graduate school. Everything was an individual program for an individual child with an individual problem, and it was just horrifically expensive. So we got this call from this private school where every child in the school had been kicked out of Los Angeles Unified School District. Now, Los Angeles is a big city, and to get kicked out of the school district, you have to go through about 7 different layers. I mean, this is the all-star game of certified teacher killers. These kids are off the wall, and they're roughly junior high age. So, 12, 13, 14, mouthy, obnoxious, don't do any work. And they said, help, come out, we need help, so here I go to help. Now, classroom management hasn't been invented yet, so I don't know what I'm doing. And I go out there, with some general knowledge, and the teacher, or the principal says, I just want you to look at some of our classrooms and tell us what you think. So I walk into the first classroom, and the chairs are empty. And I'm trying to figure out what's going on. I look over here. Now, on this side of the room, there's a cloak closet that stands about this high. On top of the cloak closet, 8 kids crouched, looking at me just like this. And I'm trying to think, what in the devil is going on? And about that time, the doors flew open. There are kids in the cloak closet. They came out with jackets and hats, and they're having a clothing fight. And the kids on the top are pelting the kids below, and the kid jumps off the top and wrestles the kid to the ground. Now, up in front of this is a young male teacher who is having a kind of religious experience, you see. He was giving his body as a living sacrifice. Many of us in the classroom do that. Your stomach lining, your circulatory system, your dental work. He was doing a slow burn. And I must have embarrassed him just by walking in the room. So he says, group! Now, I'd been working with groups, group therapy, group process, group dynamics. I didn't see any group. And the next thing he says is, I am simply going to wait until you all settle down. I thought, it's November. How long has he been waiting? So I went to the next classroom. A young female teacher, also 3 sheets to the wind, she's having a group discussion. Now, I can tell because everybody in the room is talking at the same time. Who do you think is talking louder than anybody in the room, than any of the kids? The teacher. All right, class, there's absolutely no excuse, blah, 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 blah. So by lunch, I'm completely depressed. I just want to go back to UCLA. At least I know how to function at the university, I didn't know how to fix this. So I stuck around. I'd promised I would. I followed the same kids into their afternoon classrooms. Now, by luck, both of these groups of kids who had different teachers in the afternoon had teachers who were what you would call naturals. Do you know what I mean? Just, God's gift to the teaching profession. They just have it. They just are beautiful teachers, just born that way, right? So here's what I saw with the kids who were jumping off the furniture. Teacher greets them warmly at the door. They take their seats. Teacher greets the next kid, takes his seat. There's an assignment on the board. The kids start working. The bell hasn't even rung yet. So by the time the bell rings, everybody's in their seat working on that assignment. The teacher goes around taking roll and doing, clerical work, and the kid's still working. And then the teacher has a lesson transition. Says, class, before anybody gets out of your seat. And the first thing goes through my mind is, don't let them out of their seats. They'll be jumping off the furniture. Are you crazy? Before anybody gets out of your seat, let me tell you what I want. I want you to hand in your papers here in the corner of my desk. If you need a drink of water, now's the time to do it. If you need to sharpen your pencil, now's the time to do it. And when you return to your seat, get out your social studies book. We're on Unit 7. Any questions? You're excused. And the kids stood up in an orderly fashion, came forward in an orderly fashion, handed in their papers, did this, did that, back in their seats, ready to go in 41 seconds. Quiet, orderly, respectful, quick. I didn't know what had happened. I'm trying to figure out what happened at lunch. I'm coming up with theories, like they all got doped on Ritalin or something. I couldn't think what had happened. Then they had a class period, a lesson. It was a lovely lesson. The kids took turns. They were respectful to the teacher. And the class period ended, and they stood up and walked out just as nice as any group of kids you've ever seen. And I have no idea why. Now, had it happened one time, I would have thought, it's just a fluke. Something weird happened today. But instead, the second teacher was also a natural. Now, she had her own style. She had her own personality, but she was just one of these gifted teachers. Once again, the classroom was orderly, productive, respectful. The kids went out. Now, here's what I learned at the end of the first day. I didn't learn how to run a classroom, but I learned this much. You can take kids who are jumping off the furniture in the morning and have them eat out of the palm of your hand in the afternoon if you know how. I didn't know how, but they obviously did. The second thing I learned just by watching the teachers is they were emotionally warm. They were not of the don't smile until Christmas mentality. They were enjoying being around kids. And the third thing I noticed was they weren't working very hard. These teachers were not going to be going to burnout workshops someday. They were going about their business, but not killing themselves. It was obvious to me that the kids were doing most of the work. The kids were working much harder than the teacher was, which somehow sounds logical. So I'm trying to figure it out. I come back on Tuesday, same thing. Wednesday, same thing. Thursday, same thing. So I have to conclude this wasn't a fluke. They do this every day. So I got the teachers together. I told them how wonderful they are. They said, oh, thank you, Dr. Jones. What I said was, what I want to know is, how do you do it? How do you get the kids to just do what you want them to do when you ask them? Stop doing what you don't want them to do when you just ask them. How do you get the results that you get? And they looked me right in the eye and they said, well, I can tell you this much, Dr. Jones. You have to mean business. Has anybody ever heard that term before? Meaning business? My mother was an old third grade teacher. I had certainly heard that term growing up, and I knew enough to say, right, you have to mean business. And how do you do that exactly? And they said, well, I tell you this much, Dr. Jones. On the first day of school, that classroom will belong to them or it will belong to you. If you don't mean business, it will belong to them and you will have a long, hard year. Makes sense. I said, right. Now, exactly how do you do it? They said a lot of it has to do with your expectations. Their behavior will not exceed your expectations. If you don't expect it, you won't get it. Sounds good to me. I said, right. Now, exactly how do you do it? They said a lot of it has to do with your values. If you value every child as a learner, do you hear what's happening in this conversation? I'm pushing the simple operational question. Exactly how do you do it? What's the operation? And the harder I push, the more nebulous the answers are getting. We're going to expectations. Now we're going to values. I said, wait a second. Give me credit for high expectations. Give me credit for high values. What I want to know is, what are you doing? Imagine I'm your substitute. You're out tomorrow with a sore throat. I'm your substitute. I'm standing in front of your class. It's 9 o'clock in the morning. Time for things to begin. Here I stand. Now tell me, what's the first thing I do? Well, that slowed them down. They thought. And then they said, well, I can tell you this much, Dr. Jones. You had better mean business. That's where we started. And I learned that day, and in many subsequent days in training teachers, that the natural teachers could not tell me what they were doing if their lives depended on it. If you push them really hard for specifics, you get some, dribs and drabs, some kind of good ideas, some homilies, but they cannot give you a method. They can't tell you how they're doing it, what they're doing. And this is the best explanation I can give you, just having worked with families and teachers over the years. The skills of classroom management are nearly identical to the skills of parenting. It's just on a group basis. How do you get a kid to do what you want them to do, when you ask them to do it the way you want it done, when you want it done, to your standards. Any parent is going to be dealing with this when they ask a kid to make their bed or clean their room. They want it done now, right, the way I want it done. School teachers are doing that all day long with one routine, one assignment after another all day long. But it's the same type of skill. So here's what I learned. If you want to be a natural teacher, choose your parents very carefully because that's your methods course. Have you ever seen a 4-year-old role-playing parent, pretending to be mommy or daddy? Have you ever heard your own words coming out of their mouth? And you think, oh, I better watch what I say, because they're taking it all in, and they're recording it, in their little video camera, and their body is the playback mechanism, and so they are learning how to parent. By the time they're 4 years old, they have seen how you get them to do something thousands of times, how you teach them to talk to you respectfully thousands of times, how you get them to quit picking on their little brother or sister thousands of times. They have it down by the time they go to kindergarten. It just lays dormant. Those skills of management lay dormant because nobody's asking them to use them. And often the first time you see these skills is when a kid is in a leadership position, like in high school, when they're responsible for getting out the student newspaper or getting together the assembly or what have you. And all of a sudden somebody takes charge, and you do this, and you're responsible for this, and next Thursday we need this. And I look at that kid and I'm thinking, I hope you go into teaching because you're already there. So I began to watch the teachers. And I would get together with them every day after school, and we'd brainstorm. What are you doing? We'd try this, we'd try that. What looks right? What doesn't look right? And over a period of months and years, they slowly began to cobble together a picture of what the specific skills were, the things that were instinctual for the natural teachers, but they couldn't label. I was coming up with the description of skills that already existed. So let's start at the beginning. What is the biggest single difference that I noticed? Now, of course, let's assume that we have lovely people who love children, all that kind of stuff, When you just look at the behavior of the natural teachers and the rest of the faculty who are, having a hard time, if you just stand in the back of the classroom day after day, week after week, and watch, it slowly starts to dawn on you what some of the critical differences are. And one of the biggest differences is this. The teachers who have a lot of behavioral problems. No, wait, let me stop right there. What do I mean by behavioral problems? When we think of behavioral problems, discipline problems, what we often think of is the big problems. You know, the child who's sent to the office, the child who, backtalks the teacher and gets kicked out of school or something like that. That's not what I see in the classroom. I could probably be in the back of your classroom for the next 6 weeks and never see you send a kid to the office. Something that happens that rarely is not going to cause you to go home tired at the end of the day. The only thing that can cause you to go home tired at the end of the day are things that happen all day long and keep you tense and exhaust you. So I'm in the back of the classroom recording every instance of, and I'll just use a term I grew up with, goofing off. Do you know what goofing off means? Fooling around. Whatever you're supposed to be doing, you're doing something else right now. That's goofing off, fooling around. I'm in the back of the classroom recording every instance of fooling around, doing what you're not supposed to be doing right now. I found, just by scoring it, that 80% of fooling around comes under one category. Now, before I even tell you what the category is, that's the ball game. That's 80% of your lost learning time, 80% of your stress, and 80% of, nagging. 80% of goofing off is simply, let me ask you a question. When you were a kid, you weren't perfect, right? So, when you were in class, if you were goofing around, fooling around, not doing what the teacher wanted you to do right now, what were you probably doing? What were you probably doing? If two of you are friends and you're sitting in class all morning and at some point you kind of fall off task, what did you probably do when you fell off task? Yeah. Talk to the kid next to you, of course. Talking to your neighbor is 80% of the fooling around. Now that's 80% of lost learning time and 80% of interactions that sound like this. Class, it's altogether too noisy in here. Now when I look up, I expect to see people working, or would the two of you turn around in your seats and get some work done? I am sick and tired of looking up and seeing nothing but talk. How many of you are raised on sick and tired? I am sick and tired of looking up and seeing blah, blah, blah. So what I've just modeled for you twice in a row is in fact the most widespread management procedure in all of education and family life and business. The most widespread management procedure in fact is nag, nag, nag. It happens and teachers nag the kids to stop. Now, 15% of goofing off is simply the child being out of their seat, when they're not supposed to. So what we're looking at is little problems that happen frequently. Big problems tend to grow out of little problems. So if a kid is getting away with something, they might push a little further, and if they still get away with it, they might push a little further, and pretty soon, they're being outrageous. But when you simply watch the goofing off behavior in the classroom that is going to cost you stress and learning time, it's the little stuff that's frequent, not the big stuff that only occasionally occurs. Now, with that in mind, let's look at the skill that distinguishes the natural teachers from the teachers who are nagging. The teachers who are nagging spend their day in the front of the classroom. They write on the board, they talk to the students, they give directions from the front of the classroom. The natural teachers spend very little time in the front of the classroom. They're out here. They come up with any excuse to be out among the students. If they're a second grade teacher and they're reading a story to the kids, they're walking among the students reading to the kids. If I'm a fifth grade teacher teaching math, I'm out among the students, looking over their shoulder, seeing how they're doing, seeing if anybody needs help. If I'm a social studies teacher in high school, I'm out here leading the discussion, calling on people, eliciting feedback. They're out here among the students. Now, I want you to imagine that this is the edge of the classroom and that's my classroom. It's a big classroom. And I'm in this corner and there are all the kids over there. Now let me ask you a question. thinking back on your own misspent youth. Where is the goofing off most likely to begin if I'm standing here? Yeah, over there. Because you learned when you were a little kid that the farther you are from the teacher, the more you can get away with, right? Yeah, duh, as the kids will say. So let's imagine that every kid has a computer in their brain, you know, in the base of their skull that goes at light speed all day long. And this is a dedicated computer, dedicated to answering one simple question all day long. And the question is the coast clear? Did you have one of those in your head? If you're going to talk to her and you're in 5th grade, aren't you kind of going to look up and see where the teacher is first? Now, if you look up and the teacher's standing right here, it's not as though you forswear the sins of the flesh and dedicate your life to scholarship. More likely, you just say, I gotta wait until the teacher's on the other side of the room, right? I mean, this is reconnaissance. So kids are scanning, kind of like radar, seeing where the teacher is. And when the teacher's over there, if I feel like goofing off, I might. And the teacher's standing right here, you probably pass. You know, your brain just says, forget about it. So every kid is computing. Now, the next thing I want you to imagine is this. Just zones of proximity around my body. Just concentric circles. And let's use a stoplight as our analogy. Red, yellow, green. Red, stop, green, go. Now, in a classroom, the red zone goes out to, right in here somewhere. Within that zone, you're so close to me, and I have such good eye contact and such good proximity that the likelihood of you two starting to talk is minimal, just because you're so close and I'm looking right at you and you get nailed. Now, it's not that it won't happen, it's just unlikely to happen. Now, past the red zone is the caution light zone, you know, like on a stoplight. And the caution light zone is like these 2 rows here. So you're a little farther from me. I don't have quite the eye contact. We're this far away. On the other hand, we do have eye contact, and I get pretty good behavior from the caution light zone, unless I turn my back to help this child. When you turn your back on the caution light zone, that's when they start their chit-chat. Now, past the caution light zone is the green zone. That's back here. You guys are in the back of the classroom, you know, several rows back. Most of the goofing off is going to come from the green zone. That's just the far side. Everybody knows I'm as far from the teacher as you can get in this classroom, and they probably are going to have a hard time dealing with this, so they'll just probably turn a blind eye toward it or not even see it at all. So everybody have the 3 zones, red, yellow, green. Every kid has a little radar going around, see where the teacher is. Okay, now, do you want to see a natural teacher in action? Do you want me to model for you what a natural teacher actually looks like in action? Are you ready? Get set, go. Isn't that a fabulous demonstration? No, it wasn't. When you watch a natural teacher in action, you don't see a 3-ring circus. You don't see much action at all. You see a bunch of kids working. That's the action. And what's the teacher doing? They're moving among the kids. Now, I'm going to give you a phrase that is fairly widely known in show business or teaching. It's called working the crowd. Working the crowd is simply getting out among the people. Have you ever seen that on television where somebody's singing or something and they go out among the crowd to be close to the crowd? So here's the statement. See, I'll give you the first half. See if you can give me the second half. Either you work the crowd or the crowd works you. Either you work the crowd or the crowd works you. Now, the natural teachers understand this. They have a PhD in working the crowd. They never abandon the crowd to stand up here and create what I'll call a stable green zone. Now let's imagine I'm giving you a social studies lesson, and it will take 25 minutes, and I'm up in the front of the room. That means the green zone is in the green zone for the next 25 minutes. Do you think kids in the green zone might come up with something to do other than my lesson, given 25 minutes to sit there? So what you're doing when you stay stable in the front is to pretty much declare open season on yourself. You're saying to the kids in the green zone, you feel like talking to each other? Go for it. And it will happen. The natural teachers are out here. Now let me show you how that works. You're in the red zone. You're in the caution light zone. You're in the green zone. So I'm simply walking. It's not, rapid or nervous. Usually it's very slow because I'm trying to read what's on your paper. I'm just strolling. So, 2 steps. Here we go. Now, those are in the caution light zone. Just look at me and compute your little computer how it feels. Can you feel it? Now let me walk 2 more steps. Can you feel it? Now, if I'm standing here looking at you, are you very likely to start talking to her? No. But what if I'm up here? Yeah, exactly. So what you just learned is this. Every time the teacher takes 2 steps, they change your zone. So your computer is saying, I'm in the green zone, I'm free and clear. And the teacher's walking, I'm in the yellow zone, I'm not quite so free and clear, I'm not quite sure. And 2 more steps, forget it. And that's what happened. I kind of instructed with my body your computer to say, and this is all subconscious, you're not really aware, to say, forget about it. Just keep working. Don't get cute. Just keep working. So what I realized is that when the teacher is working the crowd, they're constantly setting all these little computers back to 0. Forget about it. So by working the crowd, the teacher is constantly what you might think of as interrupting the disruption. The kid might want to talk to their neighbor, but when they look up and see this, they think twice. And then they just kind of give it up and just keep working. Now, let me say something about discipline management, because this is discipline management. Most of my schooling in discipline management at college had to do with consequences. That's certainly behavioral psychology. Consequences. What is the consequence? And I think when we're thinking about discipline management, we're thinking about misbehavior and what's the consequence for misbehavior. I'll say to all my trainees the following. I have a PhD in consequences. Let me tell you something about consequences. They're expensive. By the time you even consider delivering a consequence to this kid for their misbehavior, you have already been hassled to the point where you're thinking about consequences. You're already had it. Then if you deliver the consequence, what's that going to cost you? Are we going to have a meeting? Am I going to have to talk to you? Am I going to have to send you to the office and then have a meeting with your parents? I mean, the cost just keeps spiraling and spiraling and spiraling. So consequences, while they'll always be part of discipline management, is the most expensive part of discipline management. Let me give you a piece of advice. If you want to succeed at discipline management, keep it cheap, cheap, cheap. Because all the time and energy that goes into discipline management comes out of instruction and sends you home tired at the end of the day. So let me give you a different perspective on discipline management from consequences. It's an old perspective. It's been around forever. An ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. Have you ever heard that one? If you cannot prevent 90% of the discipline problems in your classroom, discipline management will eat you alive and send you home tired at the end of every working day. And you can only go home tired at the end of so many working days before the well runs dry and you don't have anything emotionally to give to kids anymore. So what we're looking at is prevention, but prevention never looks like discipline management. By the time you have a misbehavior that looks like discipline management, it's too late for prevention. You already have the misbehavior. Prevention looks like other things, like strolling around the room nonchalantly while I read a story to my second grade class. That's discipline management. It just doesn't look like discipline management. So I asked the natural teachers, because I'm still trying to figure this out. Why are you always moving around the classroom? I think they're going to give me the answer, how to do discipline management. And they looked at me like that was the dumbest question they've ever been asked. And I said, I'm serious. Why are you moving around the classroom all the time? And they said, well, I just want to see what the kids are doing. And one of them looked at me like I was really slow and said, well, Dr. Jones, if you just gave a child something to do, wouldn't you be curious as to how they did it? And it's kind of like, yeah, well, duh, yeah, I guess I would. So in the teacher's mind, it's all about checking for understanding. It's all about seeing how this kid is doing, and I worry about this child, so I want to see how they got started on the assignment. And this one I don't have to worry about because he gets an A, but this one I do, and I want to see how they're doing. So they're just worrying about how the kids are doing. And they're getting close enough to the kids to actually read the work and see how the kids are doing. Now, for free, they're getting discipline management. It's like the tail that follows the dog. They're getting working the crowd just as a byproduct of checking on how the kids are doing. And these teachers, when you say, what do you do for discipline management? They'll look at you and say, well, I don't have any discipline problems. Now that's, the first time I heard it, I thought, oh yeah, right. But then I realized they weren't exaggerating. But there's more to it than working the crowd. That's just square one. We all understand, the general objective, what's going on with working the crowd. So I started visiting schools all over Los Angeles, elementary schools, middle schools, high schools. You know what I found out? Almost nobody works the crowd. Almost everybody teaches from the front of the classroom, has a rowdy green zone, and nags the kids all day. And I thought, why is this so rare? Why does it take, a few natural teachers to show this to me? Why isn't this, just part of the common lore of teaching? Well, classroom management hasn't been invented yet, so I'm still very concrete. And I just started looking at the classrooms. And the first thing I learned was, well, let me show you. I think you'll be able to see it on the camera. This is just a picture of a classroom, kind of schematic drawing. Here's the chalkboard or the whiteboard. Here's the teacher's desk. Here is the arrangement in a typical classroom. These are desks. Has anybody ever seen that room arrangement? All right. Who arranged the furniture in that classroom? The janitor. That's right. This is your basic janitorial room arrangement. Now, what is the janitor's vested interest in your room arrangement? Well, what do they do for a living? Cleaning. So if you don't arrange the furniture the way you want it, the janitor will arrange it the way they want it, so that they come in with a dry mop, go down, up, down, up, down, up, around twice and out. That is the most efficient room arrangement for a janitor with a dry mop. Now, it just so happens that the best room arrangement for the janitor is the worst possible room arrangement for you. Let me put something in here that would be left out of the schematic drawing. Legs and feet. Imagine long, skinny junior high legs and smelly size 9 sneakers. Now, given the crowding of most classrooms, is this kid's feet up under the back legs of the chair in front of them? Okay, what that means is that inadvertently, out of naivete, the janitor has just given you 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 impenetrable barriers between this side of the room and this side of the room. Now, let's imagine you're standing here helping that student. Would you all point to where the disruption will begin? Would you all? Yeah, you got it, right there. Here you are, there it is, all predictable. Now here's the question. What are you going to do? What are you going to do? Are you going to use your mouth? Now the two of you over in the corner, when I look up, I want to see, is this going to work? Has nagging ever driven a kid to righteousness? So eventually, let me ask you a question. Have you ever watched the same kid do the same misbehavior over and over, and at some point, you just lost your patience? You know, your soul kind of snapped, and you said, that's it. Have anybody ever had that feeling? That's it. It's time to lay down the law. So, you march over there. Now, by the time you get here, you've pulled the whole class off task because they've been all wondering, what does happen? You know, inquiring minds want to know. And when you finally get over there, you have one of the dumbest conversations in all of education. It sounds like this. I'm tired of looking up and seeing nothing but talking over here. And the kids go, okay. And what I want to see is some work on these papers. Do you understand? Okay. So get your name here, get the first problem copied so that when I come back, I see some work. Okay. All right then. You look up 15, 20 seconds later, what are you going to see over there? So what I have just done is give a public demonstration of the fact that no matter how hard I try, I can't stop two kids from talking on the other side of the room. That's what the kids just learned from that lesson. So when you look at the custodial room arrangement, what you must realize is this: you can't win. There is no way to turn that into an easy life in the classroom. So how do you arrange the furniture? Well, there are different size classrooms and different size kids and different kinds of furniture. And I've pushed a lot of furniture in a lot of classrooms over the years, trying to make it work. And I finally realized I keep coming up with the same patterns over and over. You know, I'm pushing it, and I'm in the teacher's classroom after the workshop. How do you like this? Can you get around? You know, if I sit in the chair, can you still get by? All that kind of, you know, practical stuff. Here's what I learned. What's important about a room arrangement is not where the furniture goes. What's important about the room arrangement is where the furniture doesn't go, because that's where you go. The purpose of the room arrangement is to facilitate mobility so you can get around. Now, what that means is you don't need little aisles. You can't spend your day going, excuse me, let me through here. Excuse me, I need to get through here. Because if it's that much work, you're just going to quit doing it. Instead, you need boulevards so that I don't have to worry about tripping over some kid's shoes or their backpack. I can just stroll along and be worried about nothing more than your topic sentence or what you're doing, you know, at the beginning of the first problem. So I'm just strolling around with a nice wide boulevard. Now, given the crowding of most classrooms, that means you have to be very planful about where the furniture goes, because the normal situation is just crowded. So here's the first thing you do. See this teacher's desk up there? Get rid of it. Well, not entirely, but push it over here to the corner. Now, what does that do? That frees up this area. Now, I take a tape measure with me. Here's what I find. The teacher's desk is 3 or 4 feet from the board. The desk is 2.5 feet wide, so that's 6.5 feet, and then there's another 8 feet out to the front row. So the front row is about 12, 13, 14 feet from the board. Now, let's imagine we're at a party. And I'm standing here with a cup of coffee, and you're seated in chairs or on a couch, and we're chit-chatting. Now, is this a comfortable social distance for us to chit-chat while I'm standing here with my coffee? Am I too close, or is this okay? It's not okay? Would you like me further away? Is this okay? Okay. So this is a comfortable social distance. Now from my kneecap to your kneecap is about 3.5 feet. So 3.5 feet is all you need for social comfort. But add another 2 feet for viewing angle from the side, and what you have is 5.5, at the most 6 feet. So the front row, instead of being 13 feet away, can be 6 feet away. So the first thing I'm doing is moving everybody forward. Well, when proximity is your objective, that's a good thing. The second thing I'm going to do is pack the kids sideways. Why? Because these are the best seats in the house. I don't want as many kids there as possible. So I'm kind of taking what would have been wasted space and turning it into space I can now use for walkways. Can you see how if you're planful about this, you can make space in a crowded classroom? Now, I don't know the size of your furniture. But for here on out, it's just plain geometry. What is the pattern that allows you to get from any kid to any other kid in the fewest steps? That's your best room arrangement. The one that allows you to get from any kid to any other kid in the fewest steps with nice broad walkways so you don't trip over things. It's plain geometry. Here's the problem. What figure is the least average distance from every point on the plane? Here's the solution. Center. Whoops, that kind of got away from me. Center. Halfway to the edge, halfway to the edge, halfway to the edge, halfway to the edge. Connect the dots. That will probably be the feature of your room arrangement that's most predictable. I'll call it an interior loop. So that you can walk this loop and read everybody's work. So here's the next calculation. How far can you read? Well, you find that I can read this kid's work pretty easily. I can usually read that kid's work, but with normal eyesight, I cannot read the third kid's work if my life depends on it. So if you actually want to check work, everybody in the room has to be within two seats of the aisle. So if you're having rows that go from side to side, you might have 2 walkways front to back. 1, 2 kids, 1, 2, 3, 4 kids, 1, 2 kids, 4 rows, that's 32 kids. There are 2 basic patterns that I keep coming up with when I'm shoving furniture around, and that is the following. A grid or a wagon wheel. Now the reason I'll use the wagon wheel is usually because 15-minute break in 5 minutes. That could be important news for somebody. If you have long tables like this, you usually end up with a wagon wheel. If you have individual tables, you usually end up with the grid. Does this sound like discipline management? It also sounds like, get to the point. What's the big picture? The big picture is prevention. Prevention is the sum of many small jobs done well. And so far, we have only walked up to the starting line. The kids haven't shown up yet. So let's have the kids show up and see what happens next. Or as they say in the Olympics, let the games begin. So now we have a room full of kids. But before they showed up, I have arranged the room so that I can get around. I have in my head how important working the crowd is. Now I teach a lesson. Let's take just a typical lesson. Let's imagine you've taught this lesson as well as is humanly possible. So the steps of the computation are here, clear as a bell. And then you get to the transition to what is often referred to as guided practice. This is when the kids get to work and do some of this math. So here is what I think of as standard teacher talk. These are words that teachers have been saying for 100 years. Here we go. All right, class, we've had a chance to go over this together and to answer questions. So class, if there are no more questions, would you all open your books to page 63, please? And let's look at the practice set on the top of page 63. Do you all have that? Now, as you can see, the practice problems are very much like the ones we've done together here at the board. We have 20 minutes till the bell rings. That's enough time to get problems 1 through 6 done. As you're doing your problems, I'll be coming around to see how you're doing. If you're having difficulty, however, I want you to look at my example on the board, work through the steps, and try to figure it out on your own. If, however, you're still having difficulty, you may raise your hand, and I'll be around to help you as soon as I can. Has anybody ever heard these words? All right. Now I'm going to assign a role to you. You're all now active participants in this workshop. And the role I'm going to assign to you is typical student on a typical day, acting in a typical fashion because you're so typical. You get what I'm driving at here. Not weird, not schizophrenic, but just typical kids. Are you ready to be typical kids? All right, let's hit the transition on the fly. And I'll be coming around to see how you're doing, class. Now, if anybody's having any difficulty, I want you to look at my example on the board and work through the steps. If, however, you're still having difficulty, you may raise your hand, and I'll be around to help you as soon as I can. Those words hardly leave my lips before, what do I see? What is, there you are, come on, don't be shy. Show me what, there she is. Okay. Let me ask the lady who was candid enough to do this. Are they the same kids every day? Let me ask you, do you have any kids in your class who say, can you help me with this? You go over and you say to them, what do you need help with? And they say, I don't understand how to do this. And you say, well, what part don't you understand? And they say, all of it. Yes. Are they the same kids every day? Yes. You know whose hand is going to be waving in your face before you even park your car. So it probably doesn't have a lot to do with that lesson, does it? So now you start to help the kid who says, I don't understand what to do here. What part don't you understand? So I start working with this child. Now, we're having a little tutoring session, right? I'm trying to reteach a part of the lesson because they don't understand it. How long will I be there working with that child one-on-one? I've only recorded this about 10,000 times with my stopwatch. Take a wild guess. How long will you be working one-on-one with the student who says, I don't understand what to do here? All of it. How long will you be there? Give me a number. 5, and somebody said the rest of their life, but anyway. Yeah, you guys are absolutely accurate because you live with it. The average length of the helping interaction is 4.5 minutes. 4.5 minutes. 4.5 minutes of one-on-one with the kid who says, I don't know how to do this, and yet they haven't tried yet. So let me point out 2 things that are happening. When I start working with this child, what do you think happens in the rest of the classroom? You got it. How long does it take the noise level to come up all across the classroom? 5 to 10 seconds. 15 seconds, there's laughter and some kids out of their seat. So how long does it take me to lose the classroom? Max, or minimum 10 seconds. How long am I going to be here? 4.5 minutes. So I keep losing the class. Now what's the teacher going to do to get the class back? Well, Let me tell you again. Nag, nag, nag. Class, when I look up, I expect to see. Ever heard those words? Class, this is the second time I've had to talk to you. You ever heard those words? Class, I am sick and tired of looking up and seeing. You ever heard those words? It's just going bad to worse. And I still have 2 more minutes here. But that's not the worst thing that's going on. It's stressful, I admit. Here's the worst thing that's going on. This kid is getting 4.5 minutes of social reinforcement from the most powerful reinforcer in the classroom, which is the teacher's body, their tender, loving, concerned, caring attention. The kid is getting 4.5 minutes of the best you have to give, contingent upon doing what? Nothing. Why is it the same kids every day? Because you're building the problem. The most widespread learning disability in education is learned helplessness. There'll be 6 of these kids in every classroom. There is no other learning disability that is happening at a base rate of 5 to 6 per classroom nationwide. If you counted it up as a mental illness, you'd call it a pandemic. But instead, we just keep trying to service these kids, doing the best we can, thinking we're doing the right thing. And all the time, we're reinforcing the very pattern that's working us to death and causing us to lose the class. So now we get down to some serious questions of prevention. Raise your hand if in any methods course you ever took, anybody ever brought up the following issue. Exactly how do you help a student who's stuck? Now, I don't mean ask for help, I want to know a strategy. What exactly is your agenda when you start talking to that kid? What is your body language? What are the first words that leave your mouth? How do you do it? Raise your hand if you got 5 seconds of input on how exactly do you help a student who's stuck. Raise your hand. Anybody? This is like Ferris Bueller's Day Off. Anyone? Anyone? 0. I'll tell you why. Because it's not even on the radar screen of teacher training. It's not in the table of contents of any methods book. It doesn't exist as a problem. I have news for you. It's a huge problem. It's costing you most of your lost learning time, most of your stress, most of your nagging, most of the kids who tune out in the middle of a lesson. How do you help a student who's stuck? Because that kid, for 4.5 minutes of lost learning time, is going to kill working the crowd. Everything we've talked about up till now is out the window because of that kid.